I'm on. I'm talking. It's that time.
I think it hit the mic.
It just started. Good morning. Good morning. Everybody enjoying that little bit of rain that hung around this morning? We were supposed to get thunder and lightning, but it wasn't enough to wake me up, so I don't know if we got it or not. Anyway, we left off with this slide last week. We're rapidly approaching this chapter, and this chapter is referred to as the chapter of wisdom from Job. And there's been quite a bit of wisdom so far. If we define wisdom, one of the things that usually come out, or two of the things, it's a combination of knowledge and experience. In fact, maybe you've seen this particular quote. Wisdom comes from experience, and experience is often a result of the lack of wisdom. And it seems like that is about what goes on in the world today. People are pointing to them as experts in wisdom and somebody else lacking wisdom. And then we find that events go on, and sometimes we wonder if anybody has any wisdom. I don't know, what was it last week that they had the big football game, and the halftime show was the big talk or the big discussion, whether it was wise or not to have that on there. Well, I have my own version of Bad Bunny, and this is my version of Bad Bunny. You remember the movie it came from? A Christmas Story. And Ralphie Parker had wanted one thing and one thing only for Christmas. Anybody remember what it was?
Red Ryder air fryer.
He wanted the Red Ryder BB gun. What was the conventional worldly wisdom that he was assaulted with through most of the movie? You're going to shoot your eye out. That was the worldly wisdom. He got it from his mother, and got it from his teacher, even got it from Santa Claus at the mall. Well, Ralphie got his wish. Christmas morning, he got his Red Ryder BB gun. What happened? Anybody?
He broke his glasses.
Yeah. Didn't quite shoot his eye out, but almost. So worldly wisdom was pretty correct in this particular situation. And we talked about experience and knowledge. And there's one more factor that this talked about, or this movie emphasized, that goes along with worldly wisdom. And that is age. Just one more thing you add to knowledge and experience, age. And to kind of explain that, this is one of my favorite pictures. Now, to go along with this picture, I know what the story is behind it. We were eating in the kitchen, and just before I took this picture, there was a huge flash of lightning and a clap of thunder. And our 4-year-old grandson grabbed Glenna's arm and said, "Mimi, we got to get out of here." Now, for a 4-year-old to say that, it's humorous. But if the same thing happened here, there was a large flash of lightning and a bolt of thunder, and Brent stood up and said, "We've got to get out of here." there would be a stampede for the exit. Because the difference being the words of an adult. Now there's a lot of definitions, and this one's kind of long. You might want to, this might be one of, as Keith said, this might be one of the photograph moments. But let me read this to you. Kind of long, so bear with me. Wisdom is a quality of having deep understanding and knowledge gained through experience, reflection, and sound judgment. It involves the ability to make well-informed decisions, consider the long-term consequences of actions, and navigate complex situations with prudence. Wisdom often comes beyond intelligence, or often goes beyond intelligence, encompassing emotional intelligence and a profound awareness of life complexities. It is valued for its ability to guide individuals in ethical choices, foster and continue and contribute to personal and social well-being. Cultivating wisdom involves a continual process of learning, self-reflection, and the integration of knowledge into practical living. Ooh, forgive me for my stumbling there, but it involves so much that you can't just go to Webster's dictionary and look up, okay, definition 1, definition 2. It is an involved thing. And in the book of Job so far, we have an involved set of circumstances. So let's take a look. In fact, in our books, or our Bibles, the book of Job was the first of 5 books, often referred to as books of poetry or wisdom literature. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastics, and Song of Solomon. Those 5 books are kind of lumped together, and we know from our original lesson that Job was the first of these to be written. In fact, they're much older. Job is much older than these other books. But they're all lumped together. In fact, if we remember back to the very first lesson we had and the YouTube video that we suggested that you watch, the book of Job is our invitation to God's wisdom. Well, I don't know how we've done so far. Let's take a look. One of Job's friends, Zophar, put it this way. In Job 11, 5 and 6, I wish God would answer you and tell you they are wrong. He could tell you the secret of wisdom. He would tell you that every story has 2 sides. Then comes this beautiful remark from a friend to build you up. You can be sure of this: God is not punishing you as much as he should. Had to throw that zinger in there to get him a little bit more. Well, Job answered, and I've said this before, in fact, I said it in the men's class. I love Job's answer. He'd looked at his friends after their advice and he said, I'm sure you think you are the only wise people left. You think that when you die, wisdom will be gone with you. But my mind is as good as yours. You aren't any smarter than I am. You haven't said anything that people don't already know. He goes on. But just as the tongue tastes food, the ears test the words they hear. People say wisdom is to be found in those who are old. Long life brings understanding, but wisdom and power belong to God. good advice and understanding are his. All this, we talk about that Job is unhappy with God. Well, he is unhappy with God because he can't understand why these things are happening to him. But through all this, he never turns his back on God. He never curses God. He never loses sight or forgets the fact that God is all-powerful. But we are more interested in what chapter 28 is all about. And we're more interested in the God kind of wisdom. Chapter 28 is where wisdom comes from. Job talks about it right from the beginning. In verses 12 and 13, but where can anyone find wisdom? Where can we get understanding? Remember, he just talked about wisdom from God is understanding. The wisdom that God has is understanding. And that is the thing that Job is looking for. He's trying to understand why these things are happening to him. He knows that he's innocent, or he is standing on that fact. Oftentimes we do the same thing. We're looking for that understanding of why these events are taking place, either to ourselves or to someone that we love or know of. He goes on and says, people don't know where wisdom is. It cannot be found by anyone on earth. In verse 15, you cannot buy wisdom with even the purest gold. There's not enough silver in the world to pay for it. Where does wisdom come from? Where can we find understanding? He's no longer talking to his friends. He's talking to anyone that will listen. Remember, where are his friends? His friends have left him. His family's left him. His children are gone. In fact, a few weeks ago, we talked about his wife couldn't even stand the smell of him. And certainly, he had no admirers anymore. In chapter 28:23, only God knows the way to wisdom. Only he knows where wisdom is. So we acknowledge the same thing. God knows what true wisdom is. God knows where true wisdom is. How are we going to find it? Well, let's just go, how about a book ahead of this? What's the next book? Psalms. Now, granted, Psalms was written quite a while after Job was, but also the writer of majority of the Psalms, we acknowledge someone that is also seeking for the answers why these things are happening to him. In in Psalm 111, verse 10, the writer says, wisdom begins with fear and respect for the Lord. Those who obey him are very wise. Praises are sung to him forever. So what's the author saying? Where's wisdom? Well, wisdom can be found with fear and respect for the Lord. And those who are wise, those who possess wisdom, do what? They obey him. If that's where wisdom is with God, then if I obey God, I am there. I am surrounded by wisdom. Turning a few more pages to the New Testament, the book of James, very first chapter. Do any of you need wisdom? Ask God for it. He is generous and enjoys giving it to everyone. So he will give you wisdom. But when you ask God, you must believe. Don't doubt him. Whoever doubts is like a wave in the sea and is blown up and down with the wind. So if you ask somebody for something, you can do it in two different manners. You can do it with the confidence of what you ask for you're going to get. Or you can phrase it so you're not really sure. But the writer here, James, tells us that if we ask with confidence and we believe, we will get it, without a doubt. In fact, the whole book of James gives us a great comparison between earthly wisdom and heavenly wisdom. If we just go to chapter 3, are there any among you who are really wise and understanding? Then you should show your wisdom by what? Living right. Then we just learned when they talked about in Job that he said, if you know wisdom, you follow God. You should do what is good with humility. A wise person does not boast. If you are selfish and have bitter jealousy in your heart, you have no reason to boast. Your boasting is a lie that hides the truth. That kind of wisdom does not come from God. That wisdom comes from the world. It is not spiritual. It is from the devil. Is Job, looking back at Job, is Job boasting that he is innocent? Now, he repeated that quite often. He repeated it emphatically. I am innocent.
He's not saying I'm righteous.
There's a quote from Dizzy Dean. I think I'm speaking to an audience that knows who Dizzy Dean is. There's a quote from Dizzy Dean that says, it's not boasting if it's true. Job is not boasting that he's innocent. He's trying to convince other people of what he knows in his heart. If someone asks you for directions, and you tell them, this is the way you go, you turn here, turn there, turn there. You're not being boastful that you know where those things are. You're telling someone what the truth is and that you have the knowledge and are sharing it with them. Job is doing the same thing with his friends and anybody that'll listen. I know what I have done. Well, he does question a couple of times and ask God, is this being punishment for things I did in my youth, things I didn't know about? But in all other cases, he said, I know what I have done. In fact, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Job talked about how he modeled his life to be true to what God wanted him to do. In the same chapter, James goes on and says in verse 16, or starting in verse 16, where there is jealousy and selfishness, there will be confusion and every kind of evil. But the wisdom that comes from God is like this. First, It is pure. What's the definition of pure? Unblemished. All right, good one. I go out and buy some pure honey. What's in it? Honey. What else is in it? Nothing. Pure honey is honey. And it tells you here that the very first thing that comes from God's wisdom is it has to be pure. It is also peaceful, gentle, and easy to please. This wisdom is always ready to help people who have trouble and to do good to others. What did Job talk about a couple weeks ago when we talked about the things that he did? What did he do for widows? What did he do for orphans? What did he do for people that didn't have a coat? He said he met their needs. He took his sheep and made coats for the people that needed coats. He took his food and shared it with those people who were hungry. Did he do it for praise or for glory? He did it because those were the things that he knew that he should do because this is what God wanted him to do. This wisdom is always fair and honest. People who work for peace and for a peaceful way get the blessings that come from right living. Well, this is a good statement. This is a nice statement. It's kind of a feel-good statement, isn't it? If you do right things will happen to you. What about Job? We're in the middle of a study of Job, and here this statement comes out in the New Testament. Does that nullify what Job did or what happened to Job?
We haven't seen the end of the story yet.
Well, we're not to the end of the story. We know the end of the story, but also the fact that it says exactly this, that right living means living to what God wants us to do has blessings. Didn't say they would be without problems, but there will be blessings. There are blessings. If we do right, there'll be blessings. If we do wrong, there may not be blessings. But we also have to understand that there may be troubles also in that right living because we are living in the world. In search for God's wisdom is not just something that we would do in a class Sunday morning or maybe even in a Bible study in your own home. It's an ongoing thing. Remember that definition that we read? It's a process that continues through thoughtful and prayerful actions. Godly wisdom, well, if we just take the word wisdom and look at it in the scriptures, and once again, this is from the ERV, the easy to read version, which is where all the scripture's coming from. But this is pretty much the same no matter what translation you're looking at. If you're looking at American Standard or King James, the numbers are pretty close to this. And you can see that the majority of the word wisdom shows up in the Old Testament more than it does in the New Testament. And look at there. A predominance of it is in those 5 books that we just talked about, especially the book of Job and Proverbs. The word wisdom shows up considerably more times than in any other book. In the New Testament, 1 Corinthians is the book that holds most of the word wisdom that we look at. So let's take a look at the book of 1 Corinthians. Wisdom is important to us and to hold on to it or to acquire it is something that we need to work at. 1 Corinthians, the very first chapter, verse 30. It is God who has made you part of Christ Jesus, and Christ has become for us wisdom from God. He is the reason we are right with God and pure enough to be in his presence. Christ is the one who sets us free from sin. So as the scriptures say, whoever boasts should boast only about the Lord. What has Christ done for us? He is wisdom to us. We read before that to have wisdom is to do what's right. How do we know what is right? Christ tells us. And if not him, Paul, in this book, in others. Going on to the second chapter, Paul writes, we teach wisdom to people who are mature. But the wisdom we teach is not from this world. It is not wisdom the rulers of this world who are losing their power. There is a difference. There's wisdom of this world, and there's wisdom that Christ shared with us. Moving on to verse 7. But we speak God's secret wisdom that has been hidden from everyone until now. God planned this wisdom for our glory. He planned it before the world began. We know that from Scripture already. Chapter 1, book 1, verse 1. Who created the world? We did. Not us, but it says Christ was part of that from the beginning. Verse 8. None of the rulers of this world understand this wisdom. If they had understood it, they would not have killed our great and glorious God on the cross, Lord on the cross. So it's Paul saying, if you want to see a comparison, right living, wisdom, the wisdom that's from God, if the rulers of this world had it, they wouldn't have crucified Christ. How can we use that today? What can we say today that is parallel to that? How about if we say, if the rulers of the world had God's wisdom, they would not be condemning God's word. We don't have to judge people, as the term is used commonly now. But if we use the judgment that we see in the New Testament where we said compare a evil tree or a bad tree has bad fruit, if we see the fruit that is produced by some leadership or some individuals, it's not judgment, it's comparison, good against bad. It's the wisdom that God has given us access to. Now, going back to Job, chapter 28, which we started with, ends with Job talking to God. He's bypassed his friends. He's talking to God, and he says, referring to God, he looked at wisdom and discussed it. He examined it and saw how much it is worth. Then he said to humans, to fear and respect the Lord is wisdom. To turn away from evil is understanding. a two-pronged effect. To see what is good and what is bad is one thing. To turn away from evil is the action that we gain from the wisdom that God provided for us. God provided us basically a black and white view of the world. And we can see it is our responsibility to make the right choices. Job and his three friends got together, or have been together for the majority of what we've studied, and over half of the book so far. We just finished chapter 28. We have already done chapter 29. We did that several weeks ago when this is the chapter that Job said, I wish things were the way they were before this happened. Remember what he talked about? That before he was afflicted by all this, he was respected. He had a family. He had wealth, but he didn't talk about those things. What he does talk about is that people listened to him. And he had a ability to help countless people. And he did as he came in contact with them. Job just wishes it was the way it was. In chapter 30, and that we talked about last week, he talks about how he modeled. Well, chapter 30 was right after 29, and he talks about what people did to him now. That people that were younger than he was make fun of him, and their fathers weren't even good enough to take care of his sheep. That people only come around him to spit in his face and to poke fun of him. But chapter 31, which we did last week, was the chapter where Job talks about all the things that he tried to do to be acceptable to God, not to put himself above other people, but just to do what was right. He prayed for his children every day. He prayed that if they had somehow sinned in some way, that they would be forgiven. He took care of the widows. He took care of the orphans. He took care of those people in need. He worked hard at that. Chapter 31 ends this way. If I ever had done any of these things, bad things, let thorns and weeds grow in my field instead of wheat and barley. And with that, the last line said, Job's words finished. The very start of chapter 31 is this way. Then Job's three friends gave up trying to answer him because he was so sure that he was innocent. They threw up their hands or folded their hands or whatever they did, but they spoke no more. They have given their opinions, their earthly wisdom that they had acquired, and every time that they had said anything that might even be a tiny bit encouraging, they would throw in something that meant that it was all Job's fault. All he ever had to do as far as they were concerned is what? Confess that he had sinned and go to God and ask for forgiveness, and it would all be better. That's all he had to do. Well, at this point, we have a new character that's about ready to enter. Now, this is kind of a Strange character in the fact that we don't know where he came from, or so to speak. We don't know how long he has been listening in or been present, but obviously from what he has to say, he heard what the three friends said to Job and what Job said to his three friends. The scriptures do acknowledge that he is a younger man than anyone here. And we'll see that he kind of disappears without any explanation also. But he has a great deal to say, and he's kind of the, for lack of a better term, I'll make one up, he's the summer up of what we have been listening to or been reading through. Elihu is the young man, and he is described with this introduction in verse 2 of chapter 32. But there was a young man, there named Elihu, son of Bachlach. He was a descendant of a man named Buz. Elihu was from the family of Ram. He became very angry because Job kept saying he was innocent, that he was right and God was wrong. First of all, do we remember Job saying that?
He never said God was wrong. He just couldn't understand.
Now, Job said he was innocent. He didn't understand why God was doing this to him. He did say that God was giving him a test. But he never said that he was right, God was wrong. He said that he was innocent. All right. All you got to do is pass this test, and I'll give you a couple extra minutes. What's that? Close. Maybe this will help. See you next week.